Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are going to give a couple of minutes to leave the rest of the attendants to join us. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to greet you. I'm Luisa Vargas, manager of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Mexico for the Western Chapter. And welcome to our webinar, Energy Sector from Canada, by the Electrical Constructor Association of Ontario and Critical Matters. And it's my pleasure to introduce you our experts for today. We have Graham Atkins and Nim Nadaraj. Allow me to read for you your bios. Graham has dedicated over 3 decades to the unionized construction industry across Canada. His journey from tool to the boardroom reflects not only his comprehensive understanding of the challenges we face, but also a deep commitment to its growth and success. He continues to shape the future of ECAO with a strategic vision and collaborative spirit to champion the interests of its members and ensure ECAO remains at the forefront of the evolving electrical landscape in Ontario. Graham is deeply committed to advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion within the electrical industry. He spearheaded initiatives to promote diversity and inclusivity through mentorship programs, training sessions, and diverse hiring practices. Currently, in conjunction with his role at ECAO, Graham is on the board of directors for the National Electrical Trade Council and the Joint Electrical Promotion Plan. He has also served on various industries committees and is an acting CEO of the Canadian Spinal Research Organization. Thank you, Graham. And also, today accompanies us Nim Nadaraj, one of the top 100 professional executives and successful leaders in Canada. Nim is an executive with 30 years of experience in helping organizations strategically align security, IT, business goals, and generate transformative results through an entrepreneurial spirit paired with discipline and enterprise delivery. In his advisory practice, he works with companies in achieving their technology, security compliance, and regulatory goals. He is currently the managing partner at Critical Matrix and Matrix Ventures. Nim has served on National Board of Directors for CIO Association of Canada and is currently an elected Board of Directors members at Headquarters Health Center. Nim is also on the board and Resonated EIA and Right HOBR. Thank you for joining us, Graham and Nim, and the floor is all yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Luisa. I'm going to share my screen, everyone. Bear with me here so we get the slides up. Okay, can everybody see the slides?
Yes.
Excellent. So thank you, Luisa and CanCham, for this opportunity. Really looking forward to this presentation together with Graham. And we're hoping that, Graham and I are hoping that, going through this experience leaves you with some learnings on the different perspectives of how we're dealing with energy in the Canadian energy sector, and also some first principles and guiding principles of cybersecurity and resiliency that you can take away back to your offices. So with that, handing it over to Graham.
Thank you, Nim, and thank you, Louisa, CanCham, and everyone who's in attendance. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you about the energy sector in Ontario and Canada. And I echo Nim's comments and also add that please feel free at any point after this to reach out to either of us if you have any further questions or would like us to expand on what we provided. Before I begin, I think it's really important to know that in Canada, the production and distribution and regulation of electricity are primarily a provincial responsibility. So each province has that responsibility. So that results in varied systems across the country. And although I'll touch on the Pan-Canadian situation towards the end, I want to start with Ontario. You can see from this slide the diversity in production of electricity in Ontario, which is also fairly similar across Canada. Just to put it in context, Ontario was the second largest electricity producer in Canada in 2021, which is the most recent accurate numbers that we have, and that's after Quebec. The province does rely on clean, diverse mix of generation sources, with over 90% coming from zero carbon sources as recently as 2021. And you'll see the breakdown there. Nuclear provides the bulk of Ontario's baseload power and generates over 60% of the province's electricity. Ontario, in fact, hosts the world's largest operating nuclear generation station. That's the Bruce Nuclear Generation Station in sort of the north central part of the province. And there are extensive refurbishment projects underway at the plants to extend their operational lifespans, as well as working on what some people call the mini nukes. Those are being constructed as well right now. Hydroelectric is number 2 with approximately 13%. Again, a clean, renewable power. And the province is expanding as well as refurbishing the hydroelectric plants across the province. Natural gas is another, it's a flexible, intermediate, and used during peak power demand times. Natural gas generation can be activated very quickly to meet demand fluctuations, though its use has increased to offset the nuclear refurbishment. So while we're repairing the nukes, we're using more of the natural gas. And then finally, and I think what is an exciting piece, and I can see that this is happening in Mexico as well, are the renewables, wind and solar being the number 1 and 2 in that area. And they're an extremely important component of the supply mix in Ontario, particularly in looking at clean electricity supply. Ontario's focused on expanding battery storage to complement the variable output of both wind and solar resources.
Of course. No, it's it's a fun fact that a lot of people don't know. We are the world's largest nuclear power installation at Bruce Power. There's always a lot of confusion, and isn't that Connecticut Yankee? Isn't that Japan? And all these different places. But one interesting information for our attendees here from Mexico, in my recent visit, working with the Consulate and Trade Commission, we met with several different groups and organizations in Mexico who are advancing the technology quotient for the country. Now, the number 1 industry to be in right now with the advent of AI and quantum computing is the data center business. And when we were meeting with Fernando Banos, who's the trade commissioner for the Canadian Consulate in Guadalajara, he said the number of companies coming to Mexico right now inquiring about how do we set up data centers and where can we set up these data centers for AI compute, quantum compute. Mexico is a hot country for this business right now. But with that data center requirement, you need one thing. Actually, you need two things. You need internet, but in order for the internet to work, you need power. So the energy space in Mexico definitely has to step up and scale up if the country is going to become a data center hub for Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and all of these different AI companies as well. But one of the unfortunate things with growing in the digital footprint of the country, you grow your cybersecurity exposure as well. And some, interesting facts that I wanted to share with this group. 90% of electric firms in Canada that faced breaches were all from third-party breaches in 2024. So what does third party mean? Third party is anybody that you work with that provides services or connectivity into your environment that is not owned or controlled by you. Your vendors, your suppliers, your contractors. All of these folks pose a risk to our organization, and it's up to us to consider how are we protecting these connections. Vendors, 45% of energy sector breaches were due to, of those 90% from third party, 45%, which is half of them, were vendors. So these are organizations that you rely on to provide core services. And about 70% increase in the number of attacks that are happening in utilities in our country. What does this mean? It means that our critical infrastructure, energy, hospitals, government, military, these are all direct targets. Air Force, airports, sorry. Anything that we rely on in order to do day-to-day operations have become general targets for the bad actors. Why? Sometimes stealing data is nice. To say, hey, I have your data, I've encrypted your company, you have to pay me so many millions of dollars to get your data back. But it's also fun for these hackers to create an inconvenience, to create fear, to create a risk, to say, I did it. And I have brought down the electricity for the city. I brought down the capability of doing something within this airport. This is all interesting for them. You would have heard in Canada a couple of weeks ago, they hacked the airport PA system and chose to play whatever audio track they chose for everyone to hear in the airport. These are not situations where people have stolen your data, but it's situations where they have created an inconvenience, highlighted a risk, and created fear. And one of the most important things that I think we should take away from this webinar is our opportunity to exchange ideas and share collaboration on what we are doing differently to secure electricity and critical infrastructure in Canada, and how that can be taken away as information that you can use in Mexico. So on average in Canada, when there is a cybersecurity breach, it costs around $7 million for the company from the time it happens to the time they say we are officially kind of recovered from this. That timeline usually takes between 6 to 9 months, in some cases even longer. Interesting incident that happened in Canada in May of this year was our Nova Scotia power company was hacked. And there was a ransomware deployed. It compromised almost 300,000 customer data. Now, the silver lining, the good news behind the breach was it did not affect the power control and power management systems. It affected their billing, their CRM, and their customer data systems, which is also bad because all our data or the Nova Scotia residents' data was stolen. But imagine if it was the other way and they had attacked the controlling systems. Now, people would be without air conditioner in the middle of summer. Critical infrastructure and hospitals will be down. sometimes, for backup, we have multiple power grids feeding hospitals and data center. But if you take down the entire grid, even the fact that you're getting power from a second line, it's not working. You need to be on battery or generator, and if you don't have that, you're going to be without electricity. Interesting fact, Hydro Quebec reported a significant jump in 3 years, where they used to see about 76 attacks in a month, in a year. They're seeing now 1,200 attacks, which is, between 4 to 5 attacks a day is what they're seeing come into their environment. So the purpose of this is not to scare you, but maybe a little bit to scare you, but make you think that, hey, our power systems are exposed because now they have become an attack target for the bad actor. So we have to take it seriously to build resiliency around these equipment, the sensors, the SCADA systems, the controllers, our control rooms, and around the people who use them, so that we can make sure that the identity and the users in there are well protected. Over to you, Graham.
Thank you, Dave. So I talked about how electricity is produced in Ontario, but once it's produced, how do we get it out to customers? So the first piece is the transmission. So there's high voltage transmission lines, which you see in Mexico as well. And they carry the electricity from generators over long distances in Ontario. And this network in Ontario is operated by a corporation known as Hydro One. Now, until 2015, Hydro One was fully owned by the government. And in 2015, they sold off some of Hydro One. And so now the government is still the largest shareholder, but they only hold 47% roughly of the shares in the company. So it's a mix of a private-public company. Once it's transmitted, then we have to distribute it. In Ontario, we use local distribution companies, and they're known in the province as LDCs. These are companies such as Toronto Hydro, Burlington Hydro, those types of people. They receive the power from the transmission lines, and then they convert it to a lower voltage, and then they deliver it to the homes and businesses via a network of distribution lines that they typically own. Also in Ontario, for the selling of electricity, consumers can choose to purchase directly from these local utilities at a regulated price, or they can get the electricity from a competitive retailer through a contract. That is not done very often. I would say that that's limited really to industrial consumers of electricity more so than households. The vast majority of Ontarians choose to buy their power from the local utilities in their area. So you see, it's a little bit different than in Mexico, where you've got the state monopoly over transmission and distribution of electricity. I'll reserve my judgment on what, I'll reserve my comment on which I think is better.
No, that's a great point. And I think, Graham, on this note, a lot of people who are not in the electricity industry, they forget that electricity is a commodity, just like anything else that we purchase in life. So there's a supply chain, right? There's the manufacturer, there's the distributor, and then there's the retailer. And just like we have that in our supply chain business, whether you're making a car or you're making electricity, you have to appreciate the supply chain needs to be secured. So when we talk about supply chain cybersecurity breaches, supply chain vulnerabilities, that is as much important for the electricity industry as it is for car making or toy making or any other consumer good that we produce.
Well, Nim, I would, sorry to interrupt, but I would suggest it's far more important, because those other manufacturers you speak about, if there's a cyber breach, if there's something that goes wrong with the production and delivery of electricity, they can't do their stuff. right?
Yeah,
As
agree.
well as the impact on general population through not having power in their homes.
Right. So if the supply chain for electricity is affected, your ability for all the other supply chains is grossly impacted, right? So it actually puts it up into that very critical perspective that we need to look at it and say, how do we do a really, really good job securing this, right? And like anything else, in the manufacturing industry, there's controls and standards and regulations that we have to follow in order to protect these supply chains. One of these, which I urge everyone to look into, is called the Purdue model. So the Purdue model is a framework that helps us secure IT/OT systems. So just like you would use NIST, NIST CSF, and other principles like a framework to manage cybersecurity within your regular technology framework, we are urging you to look into how can you use the Purdue model alongside with your regulatory framework like NIST or ISO or NSERC to protect your infrastructure, which means looking at your environment in a 7 sort of layer system, but considering that each layer has a significance and a different layer of security you need to add. Level 5 being your business level. This is where your email, your identity, your documents live, and how are you going to secure them, and what are the policies you need to enforce in them. Then you have your enterprise IT, which is your network, your Wi-Fi, your firewall, connectivity from one one control point to another control point. Now you have your industrial zones. So this is where you can implement controls that buffer your SCADA controllers, your operating zones where you're connecting to your OT infrastructure, and then each of the sites below that. And then from there, going into areas, the actual sensors and controllers and drives within the electricity production, manufacturing, distribution system, and then making sure that your processes are secured. Now, some of the examples in there, I've contextualized it to say, how does this relate to regular business, not necessarily electricity? But the objective here is to ask yourself, what have you done to understand how each of these layers are secured within your electrical manufacturing, distribution, or retailing industry? And if you are not clear as a business leader or as a technology leader, what those actions are that we've taken as a company, then this is the time to go back and ask the question, hey, what do we need to do to make this more secure? How can we act to make a change to improve the security posture for the business, or all the way down to managing our process and process controls? Good segue into regulation and oversight.
Yeah, this is where I perceive a significant difference between the Mexico situation and that in Canada. So there are 3 key bodies that are responsible for regulation and oversight of electricity in Ontario. So the first one is the Ontario Energy Board. This is an independent energy regulator. The OEB licenses all participants in the electricity sector. It sets transmission and distribution rates. It establishes consumer protection rules, and it also approves infrastructure projects such as transmission lines. When I say it's an independent energy regulator, I want to be clear on it. It is an arm's length government agency, right? So while it is a government agency, the arm's length means that it is independent of the government and can act in the way it's supposed to, the way it feels best for the regulation and oversight of energy in Ontario. They are, however, at the end of the day, accountable to the Minister of Energy and Mines. And you'll see the third ministry on there that I highlighted, Ministry of Energy and Mines, This is the provincial ministry that sets the overall policy framework for Ontario's electricity sector. So they set that framework, and then the OEB goes about setting rates, transmission rates, distribution rates, protection rules, all of the things that sort of do the minuscule, so to speak, regulation of the industry. The third party in there is the Independent Electricity System Operator, or IESO. This is a not-for-profit corporation, and it manages Ontario's power system in real time. They're the ones that are overseeing it on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis. And what the IESO does is it balances supply and demand. So summer months, for example, when everyone here turns on their air conditioners in Ontario, there's a greater demand for electricity, and IESO balances that by opening up supply to allow to meet that demand. Similarly, if you have off hours, such as after 11 o'clock at night, where there's not as much energy being required, they will dial back the supply of that energy. They also, and this is another important piece for the independent electricity system operator, they will plan for the province's long-term energy needs. So given that they are doing that supply-demand balancing on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis, they are the ones most appropriately situated to be able to plan and set the province's long-term energy needs. Those are the three key regulation and oversight bodies for electricity in Ontario.
Now, Graham, I'm learning a lot about the Mexican structure, and you alluded to it a little bit on the last slide that you talked to. How is this oversight different between Mexico and Canada?
Well, as I understand it, there's the Secretaría de Energía and the Ministry of Energy, and they're the ones that set the national policies. They prepare the what they call Electricity Sector Development Plan, I believe it's called. They grant the permits for generation, and I believe they are the ones that oversee the entirety of the sector and try to ensure that supply of energy services in the transition are appropriate. But there's also the National Energy Commission. And this one is a little bit new to me, as I believe this came through in the 2025 regulatory changes. And they were formerly the Energy Regulatory Commission. And what I understand them to do is they're the technical body under the Secretary or the Ministry of Energy. And what they do is they regulate, they supervise, and they sanction activities throughout the energy sector. So they'll issue the generation permits, they'll approve tariffs for transmission and distribution of services, and they'll manage any of the clean energy certificates. So I think there's a similarity name in the two. And you know, we definitely have the OEB and the IESO or the main, sorry, I shouldn't use those anagrams. Ontario Energy Board and Independent Electricity System Operator are sort of the day-to-day, month-to-month, year-to-year regulators with oversight from the Ministry of Energy. It seems to me that the experience in Mexico is they've just eliminated the two at the bottom and have the one.
Have the one, right. That's very cool. Should be easier to make change and also streamline sort of the accountability when something goes wrong.
Yes.
You know, what we've done, you know, in Ontario is shifting to outcome-based regulations. So there's some new regulatory requirements from data protection, data disclosure, transparency for consumers. These are things that we have, you know, anytime there's an incident, I've gotten letters from different electricity companies that customers have shared with us saying, hey, you know, they said that something happened and my data was not lost, but they had an incident. Well, normally in Ontario 3 years ago, nobody would have communicated that there was an incident, but your data is okay. But the OEB has now mandated that regardless of what happens, you have to tell all your paying customers what's going on, especially if you're in the retail side of hydro. About 80% of the utilities right now in Canada and specifically Ontario, they're working on some digital transformation program. Because in order to align with, to what Graham shared on from a regulatory perspective, the people are ready, but the process and the technology is very old. There's a lot of antiquated, old infrastructure in Canadian electricity and electricity distribution companies and systems. So they're investing heavy in digital transformation to make it better. On top of that, about 61% of the distributors actually have confirmed that their OT systems are not up to the standard that it needs to be. So it makes the business case for this digital transformation even more significant. And then we talked about it earlier that there's that $7 million if something goes wrong on average. It could be more, maybe a little less, but everyone is concerned that financial risk for the utility, because a lot of these, none of us have $7 million sitting around in case something goes wrong. And you remember, this is on average every time something goes wrong. So, God forbid you have 3 incidences in 1 year, that essentially could put a company out of business. The number one thing that we as electricity manufacturing, distribution, and retail organizations across the country are leaning in on is collaboration. And encouraging that joint planning with the regulators and the suppliers and the vendors to focus on continuous learning, continuous testing, as well as reporting and communication. Because if something bad happens to one company and the vulnerability that resulted in that incident happening, it probably exists in another company too. So how quickly do you share and communicate this information? So as a whole, we become stronger, and together we're going to be stronger.
Actually, Nim, before I go into the Pan-Canadian, could you just back up to my previous slide? I want to clarify something, because I did say that IESO, the Independent Electricity System Operator, is a not-for-profit corporation and it's responsible. But I want to be clear on something. It is a piece of legislation that establishes IESO as the agency that looks after the market operations and executing government policy, right? So that's important. And also, and this is a little bit of a problem, or sorry, not a problem. It's an issue that we've dealt with in Ontario for a number of years now. The government is the one who appoints IESO's directors, and the government can issue directives that shape IESO's policy. So when I say, it has independent in the name of the organization, but I would say they're somewhat dependent. How's that?
Yeah, good clarification.
I just want to talk briefly about the Pan-Canadian context, and I'm not going to go into this very much. There is not a lot of difference on how electricity is generated, transmitted, and distributed throughout the country. But as I said at the start, provinces and territories, they have the primary jurisdiction over their own electrical generation, as well as their distribution. Where the federal authority comes in on this is the federal authority, the federal government, what they look after, what they cover are aspects of nuclear generation, right? So all of the nuclear, that's actually federal, and electricity exports. So notwithstanding the fact that the electricity is generated in Ontario, when we sell that energy to Michigan, as an example, the federal jurisdiction kicks in and they have responsibility for that. They are also involved when provinces sell and transmit energy to each other. So anything that goes sort of outside of the province of Ontario has federal oversight. And what regulates all of those exports from Canada to the United States, I use Michigan as an example, is what's called the Canada Energy Regulator. Everything that goes down to the US from Ontario or any other province in the country falls under the Canada Energy Regulator. The one other piece where the federal government is involved is on clean electricity regulations. So in 2024, there was these regulations were finalized. And Canada's goal, as you can see on the slide, is to help achieve a net zero electricity grid by 2050. There are some skeptics feeling it's a rather ambitious plan, but starting in 2035, the regulations will actually be setting limits on carbon dioxide pollution from any fossil fuel powered electricity generation with a capacity of 25 megawatts or more. And then from year to year, that number lowers. So the goal is that by 2050, it is a net zero electricity grid. So that's where the federal government comes into play regarding the generation, transmission, and distribution of electricity in Canada.
Mhm. That's really neat. I think one of the goals that the Mexican government has set aside is by 2030, they want to have 45% of the country's energy produced from green renewable resources. And it's not a big jump because I think right now it's at about 20, right?
I'm curious about that as well, Lee, myself, because I noted that in preparing for this, that I think there's only the one nuclear facility in Mexico at the moment.
Yeah.
And the number I gleaned was somewhere between 6 and 9% of the nation's energy is produced from that nuclear facility. So I'm curious to see if they'll be looking at either additional full-scale nuclear facilities or even the small modular nuclear stations.
Mm-hmm. Which would be interesting, especially because it's known globally that for affordable data center construction, um, Mexico has opened their doors to say the world should come here. So you're getting all the big guys like Anthropic, Google, Amazon, Meta. Everyone is going to Mexico and investigating this. So creating rapid ability to create units that produce energy is going to be more and more part of their economic growth plan. Um, in doing some research, there's about 2,300 economic units in Mexico today that is part of the power journey, right? So to create it, distribute it, to create it, transmit it, and distribute it. But when I read this fact, knowing how weak and fragile our electricity system is, this is 2,300 endpoints that are also somewhat fragile in Mexico, that if somebody attacks, say 10% of this, so 200 or 230 units, it could significantly decrease the amount of electricity available to Mexican civilians and businesses who rely on constant electricity being provided to them. About 25% today, that's the number I was thinking of, is coming from low carbon resources. And that 25%, I believe the the government's mandate is increasing that to 40 to 45% from wind, solar, geothermal, or nuclear. But in the process of doing that transformation, these systems, tools, and processes will become more digital. And the risk is today there's 39% of the national cyber attacks in the whole world. And we're talking about a number that is in the billions and trillions. So when we say 39%, that's a very big number. And that big number is mostly attacking, power and utilities with the hopes of bringing something down significantly, because that will be a big prize for these bad actors to say, oh my God, I brought down the entire grid in Toronto, or brought down the entire grid in Guadalajara, which means we need to be extra diligent in all our digital grids, including cybersecurity as a fabric of the way they're being created and transformed. In Ontario, the OEB, they moved to a very outcome-based modernization plan, where they're also asking each of the organizations that are participating in the power supply chain to do an annual independent cybersecurity assessment. So basically, you go through and you hire a third-party vendor, go through your due diligence with the vendor, make sure they're secure and a good partner, and have them perform a cybersecurity assessment to say, hey, here are your gaps. These are the things you need to focus on getting better next year. And again, they come back next year, do another assessment. Okay, you fixed these 5 things. You still have these 3 things that you didn't do. And this is one thing that we're excited in helping organizations in Canada, Mexico, and all over North America do, is making sure that that energy modernization aligns with the correct security, the governance, and operational best practices, so that we can make energy and electricity safe for everyone and abundantly available in the future. I've shared some facts in previous trips to Mexico and talking to people there. They always say, we're not a target. Usually we are only attacking North American companies or European companies, but there are 10 strong ransomware groups very much focused on attacking Mexico. Lockbit, Claw, and Lockbit2, these are big ransomware franchise organizations who have successfully attacked many, many, many businesses in Mexico. I'm showing you a screenshot from a tool that we use that shows Mexican businesses that have been breached recently. And some of these as early as November 6th. Now, this is not a breach of confidentiality. These companies know that their information is online, and they know that something bad happened, and they have already communicated to whoever they need to. But it is not a surprise that Mexico is a target. It is a rapidly emerging market. It is one of North America's largest economies. And with all the political situation now, without going into details, it's very much a target to say, hey, are you dependent or not dependent on being connected to North America? So to stand strong, I think as companies within the country, we have to stick together. We have to improve our cybersecurity resiliency and get stronger. And the first step is admitting that there is opportunity for us to get better and making an effort to understand where are these things that we're falling short, and make a list and start attacking them one at a time. That's how we're going to improve. Nothing's going to happen overnight. It takes time. So with that, Graham and I, Graham, if you want to have any comments, or we'll open it up to questions from the.
Just before we open the questions, Lynn, there's one other thing I want to point out. So clearly, Mexico is going through a bit of a transformation with respect to the regulation, the generation, distribution, transmission of energy, of electricity. And one of the reasons for going through the Ontario and the Canadian experience is to demonstrate that when you have split jurisdictions, such as we have in Canada. That means that those of us that are involved in the electricity industry are at the mercy of at least two levels of government election cycles, right? So now we have two sets of regulations that are impacting on what we can and we cannot do. And so maybe a cautionary tale when I look at and I'm sure there are arguments against having the federal government have a monopoly on everything, but there are some things that people have to be careful about when it comes to these types of things. All governments are on an election cycle, as we know. Very rarely do we get meaningful looks at things 20, 30, 50 years into the future. They're really looking at their 3, 4, or 5 year term. So sorry if I got too political there.
No, it's a great point that, aligning with the government agenda is very important on how quickly you can scale, right? Especially in Canada, you might be perfectly on one side, but a political change on the other will completely slow down any funding and opportunity to grow into that project. I have little understanding of how complex this challenge is in Mexico, but for sure, making an effort to understand we align with the regulatory requirements published by the government in Mexico. For example, they have published a data governance rule, a law that says, hey, if you have privacy information, customer information, and data that you collect from a transaction, you have to secure this. This was a law that was passed in May this year, and they have set the standard of how you're going to do it. From next year, you're going to get fined under the ARPA regulation in Mexico. So if there's an incident, the government's going to include penalties. All right. Any questions, Luisa, from the audience?
Thank you. Still, we don't have questions. Please, our assistants, be free to, it not have to be a question, also a comment, anything. It's always very welcome. And also, I want to share just a couple of comments. As we can see, our energy sector, and I say our because at the moment, the connection and growth we currently have between Mexico and Canada continues going up. So our energy sector is definitely the starting point, the beginning of all manufacturing and the continuity of all businesses. We need to understand this and therefore complement it. Let me explain more myself. I have a couple of data. Canada and Mexico continue to build over 80 years of diplomacy relationship. Building on this foundation, the Canada-Mexico Action Plan 2025-2028 is structured around 4 strategic pillars: prosperity, mobility, inclusivity, and well-being, security, and environment and sustainability, reflecting the shared priorities of both countries. As you can see, as mobility, for example, electromobility, also security, as also cybersecurity. So all these pillars are part of this 0.0 from the energy sector. Also, Canadian trade and investment with Mexico is strictly growing. We have nearly 56 billion in two-way merchandise trade in 2024. Mexico and Canada is the third largest single country merchandise trading partner after the US and China. Canada was Mexico's 5th largest merchandise trading partner in 2024. So, and also Mexico has diverse consumer market with increasing demand for high quality goods, services, digital, as you said, and technology solutions. In deep integration into global supply chain, align well with Canada capabilities, especially in sectors as automotive, aerospace, agriculture, and clean technologies. So, therefore, in order to ensure continuity in all these sectors, having a strong and secure energy sector is undoubtedly essential for their growth. So, this is for me, especially for CanCham in the middle of this relation, is like the 0.0 that we have to start the conversations to guarantee all our continuity in the rest of the sectors and manufacturing and automotive and all of them. So thank you very much. Graham, Nim, it's a real pleasure to hear you, and thank you for sharing with us all these important information that it's so based for our bilateral relationships between Mexico and Canada. And to our audience, if right now you don't have any comment or questions, also you're going to receive this recorded session, so you can hear it after this time, anytime. And also we are going to be here for you and to make the connections with Nim or with Graham in this aspect. So thank you very much. I don't know if you have any last comment that you want to share with us, Nim, Graham.
Well, I would echo your sentiments, Louisa, about the importance of the collaboration between Canada and Mexico. We've seen it increase. We can talk about why, but it doesn't really matter. I think that Canada certainly sees a need to diversify its relationships and not be tied to one entity in too much of a percentage, at least. And so I think that I think you're right. I think this is a new era for Canada-Mexico relationship. And I'm optimistic about it. And I hope that both countries fully embrace the opportunity.
Mhm. I agree with Graham. There is one question that somebody posted in the chat about the lack of cybersecurity law in Mexico. You know, we mentioned in the beginning, in Canada, every province is responsible for making their own power. Just like that, I believe that every organization has the power to be responsible for their own cybersecurity. Regardless of whether there is regulation or law, as a leadership team, as a board, as a employee, we can raise the bar by making suggestions and trying to implement better controls within our organization. How do we address this from a regulatory perspective? I think that will come from the government. Like, we're seeing a very cyber progressive posture from the new Mexican government in the last 1 year. The things that I have read with data protection laws, penalties, and creating those specifications on using certain standards, it's going to get better and better. But in order for the regulation to rise, the economic investment in the country has to rise. And so when we see these big companies like Meta and all these other ones come and say, hey, we want to build a data center in Helixo, or we want to do this in Monterrey, we want to do these things, that is the opportunity for us to rise from the regulatory perspective as well. So the change is happening. It seems slow today, but believe it or not, in the next year, when we do the same webinar in 12 months, we're going to see I think 100% change. I'm always available to provide feedback and suggestions to help. So if you ask the question in the chat, you can email me. I'm happy to share context on Pemex and what's happening, on a regular basis with CFE. We talked about that just in the beginning of September when I was in Mexico. But it is coming to the realization that we are a target. It is no more that, oh, Mexico, like, we're low key, no one's looking at us. That's not true. You've been a target from the beginning because you're one of the biggest economies in this side of the world. So it's now just coming a reality to us. Oh, they are attacking us. We need to do something about it.
Well, I also think then that this is a perfect opportunity to start taking a serious look at how to put regulatory protection in place. Whether it's Canada's deals with the EU, where we have to abide by their cybersecurity laws. But I think that as we start to see our relationships more fully develop, that being Mexico, with other countries, I think it's a matter of looking at what their laws are like, right? And Europe has a pretty strict, as I understand it, data protection law. And so if you're dealing with them, you have to take care of that. You have to abide by that law. But I think as long as we focus, and again, Nim's the expert on this, not me, But I think as long as we focus on the protection of personal data, in addition to that cyber protection, I think that we will be able to develop what's required for different sectors throughout Mexico and Canada.
Yeah. Thank you, Graham. That's great.
Thank you. Thank you, Monica, for your question. And thank you, Nim, from it's always a pleasure to hear you. It's always a pleasure to know and to talk with you all these things. So we are at the final of this webinar. We will share the presentation and the contact from Ram and Nim for any specific case or question that you have. So as you see, they are both experts and they are both so open people to talk with. So we have a very great opportunity. Thank you very much for your presence and your time, and we wish you an excellent day. This was our last webinar for this year, so we have a next webinar in the next 2026. And thank you very much. So we'll see you soon. We'll share with you all the information. So thank you very much, and see you soon.
Thank you, Luisa.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye bye.